Welcome to the newest episode of All Things LOCS, where we're discussing everything related to leadership, operations, culture, and strategies for growth. So today I want to talk about something that a lot of people struggle with is why do great employees make bad managers? Right? We've all run into that trap where you either have an employee who has been with you for years, or maybe it's an employee who has been with you for, maybe a short amount of time, but they've excelled at what they're doing. And you've looked at them and say, you know what? I think the next step for you management, director, leadership role, and then they struggle or they really underwhelm you. Maybe you thought you'd get more from them and you're not seeing what you really thought you would see from them when they were an employee. Question is, why does this actually happen? Was it bad judgment? Was it something changed with the employee, as a lot of you out there want to think? So today what I want to do is I want to run through not just why this actually happens, but how to identify people that are readily equipped to step into the next role. What do you need to see from them? How could you make sure you don't make a mistake? And at the end of the day, you also want to make sure that you set employees up to succeed and not fail. And this is what we're going to be talking about on this and so much more. Let's get started. Now, if you've listened to any of these episodes that we've done up to this point, you definitely would have heard at least snippets of my own personal story when I went from being a clinician to being promoted to the role of director. And I've been very honest where I said, and will continue to say, that I struggled mightily. And I did what a lot of young people, and just more importantly, people with ego do, which is I wanted to really blame the employees. And back, when I was younger, I really measured leadership by really how many hours I was working, right? It's just productivity and leadership. You're working 60 plus hours a week. You're dedicated. You're committed. You can't be part of the problem. Has to be somebody else. So when we look at what really goes into actually not just becoming the person who's going to really help influence others to grow, what do they really need to see from you? So when I, evaluated myself and I got past the point of, all right, I'm working 60 plus hours, I was an amazing clinician. I got great results. Amazing results with patients. Always got them better, took amazing care of them, really was able to honestly, when we're looking at a business standpoint, generate a lot of revenue for the company. And it was all through obviously very ethical practices. Just my patients were consistent. They came in, they were compliant. They gave me a lot of referrals because I took really great care of them. So I was able to generate a lot. So when it was looked at through the lens of the owner and the CEO, it was, all right, Dan is working a lot of hours. He's basically the first one in, the last one out. He is working his ass off all day long. He's taking amazing care of patients. And a lot of times I would just push my notes off to the end of the day, which obviously I'm not recommending any of you to do, but that's just what I would do. I would treat patients and I would just honestly spend a lot of time with them. And I'd get to my notes either during lunch or it was after work. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, or it was on the weekend. So they looked at that and said, all right, he's very dedicated and he's very good. And at that point, I was starting to understand the business aspect of healthcare a bit. So it was, okay, and you understand the business. So you, Dan, are the most appropriate person for this role. Now, the trick is I really didn't have the skills, right? And this is where a lot of us run into some issues there, which is that we look at the person in the role that they're in, and then we think that that is what's going to make them great in the next position. So it would be, no different if you took somebody who was maybe working at the front desk and then you said, you know what, I'm going to make them the practice manager. Same idea, right? It's not even necessarily about the skills, but it's also about the expectations that you have for them, but it's the expectation that they have for themselves. And then the expectations that the employees have for them, right? And when we look at people who struggle with the promotion or struggle in a leadership position, and this is also a reason why a lot of younger staff employees don't want to get into the leadership positions. It's not just the responsibilities that come with it, but it's, all right, now the dynamic has shifted, right? And you think about this, if you're a clinician and you're working with other clinicians and maybe they're colleagues, maybe some of them are genuinely your friends. And now all of a sudden, you're technically in charge. And that's a dynamic that's not easy for a lot of people to deal with. And that's from the standpoint of the person who was promoted as well as to the employees who weren't. right? Because now they're saying, hey, we've been hanging out, we've been friends, and now you're technically in charge of me. Now you're having conversations with me about what I screwed up on or what I could do better. Or they think they're going to get conversations like that. So that alone makes it very difficult for some people to really deal with being promoted into that leadership position. And this is what happened to me, is that, yeah, I was great with patients. And guess what? When I got promoted, that didn't change. I was still great with patients. But I didn't know how to communicate to employees, right? I really had no idea how to positively influence them. I think, but back then it was really more a matter of, all right, if I'm busting my ass and I'm working really hard, leadership by example, right? Everybody else is going to do the same. And then when they don't, or at least my perception was that they weren't, I'd get pissed, right? And at the end of the day, though, what a lot of us do, when you're that employee who's high achiever, or what we'll call maybe a producer, they make a lot of money, or they treat a lot of patients, they get great outcomes for you. They have a certain thing that they're chasing, which is praise, plaudits, significance. And then they move into a position where now your role is technically to help other people, not name patients. And all of a sudden, there's some conflict, which is, all right, if I'm still chasing the appreciation and the praise, how do I do that when I'm supposed to be actually guiding other people? Right? So that's where a lot of people end up, struggling, is that they have great technical skills. So if you're working with a doctor, or you're working with a chiropractor, or whoever, this person's amazing at what they do. So therefore, they should be amazing at this new thing as well. Technical skills don't mean you're going to be great unless you have what we call emotional intelligence. And this is one of the biggest reasons that people struggle. And it's the biggest reason I struggled. I had zero emotional intelligence. I'll put it to you this way. I didn't even know what emotional intelligence was. So if you don't know what it is, probably don't have it. But I had no idea what the hell it was. I had no idea how to communicate to people. My personality is one that just very driven, forceful. I have a very determined mentality, and that doesn't always work well with others. So it was great for patient care because I would do whatever the hell I had to do to get the patients better. But didn't work so well when I had to actually now start changing my approach because I wasn't really focused, or I should say I was focused on myself, but I was in a position where I shouldn't have been focused on myself, and I should have been focused on the employees. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make, is that they go from chasing that significance and the praise and the admiration to now they're in a position where that's not healthy to do that, because then the people that you're technically in charge of or leading, they see that and they know you're not about helping us. You're clearly about helping yourself. So when you guys are assessing the employees, and we're going to get into ways to understand how to make the right move, this is something you need to really factor in. It's not a matter of, hey, they're chasing this, or, Dan is chasing significance. Those conversations do need to actually be had. And I really do wish it would have made my life a lot easier if somebody actually had sat me down and say, doing a great job. Love the approach. This is what I need to see from you when you start working with other people. But that's just one major reason. This is why if you guys have promoted people and then they struggled and you're scratching your head saying they were phenomenal at what they were just doing, why are they having a hard time with this? That's the biggest reason why. So when we look at leadership skills and we talk about what are some reasons that people actually struggle when they're put in that position of director, manager, or leader, they don't have the skills. They were never taught. And I know, you look at some people maybe in your life, whether it's business, home, friends, or family, and you maybe see somebody who's a great leader. You say they have it, right? They have the gift. That might be, but the amount of people that actually have the gift of leadership, it's minimal. And that doesn't mean they don't have the capabilities. It just means those skills don't come natural to a lot of people. So if you're not training your employees, now you might be saying, well, I don't really have great leadership skills either. So we'll get into that. But if you're not training your employees on how to actually be a leader and understand, all right, these are the skills that we need to see from people who are in leadership positions. If they don't have those skills, how can you expect them to succeed? They're going to fail. And then ultimately, the team's going to fail, But who are they going to blame? They're not going to blame you. I mean, they might say, why the hell did you promote this person? But they're going to blame the person who's in charge, the manager, the director. And I've seen it over and over again. So do yourself a favor, and more importantly, do them a favor. Set them up for success by actually teaching them how to be a leader, train, mentor. And if you're, again, sitting there saying, well, if I'm being honest, I'm not the greatest leader either, then hire somebody, hire a coach, hire a consultant, somebody who can come in and actually not just help your own leadership and the rest of the teams, but actually help you create some kind of leadership training so you can keep it going. Because at the end of the day, it's not just a matter of training one person to be a director or manager. It's how to actually train everybody who comes after them, right? You're going to need successors. Maybe you have new departments, new clinics, or people leave. Who's replacing them? So it's how do I create a pipeline? And then, when we talk about other reasons that people in those positions struggle, one of the biggest things is they don't know how to delegate. They just want to keep doing. And one of the biggest mistakes that newer people to leadership make is they think that the more they do, the more they're actually helping the team, right? If I take all these tasks on and I have the team do less, especially in healthcare, where we know burnout is a major issue, you might be thinking like I was thinking, well, if I do more for the team, takes some off their plate, they should be happy. Which is why I really struggled with the fact that they didn't like that. Employees were getting pissed I was doing that. And I really couldn't understand why. And when you finally realize that when you do things like that, you say, look, I'll do that for you, or you don't have to worry about this, I took care of it for you. Number one, you're not showing any trust at all, right? What you're telling them is, I don't trust you to do this. I'll do it. And that's exactly what was happening for me. And when you handle, every single situation that arises, how are you then teaching, again, that next crop of leaders, how are you teaching them how to handle it? Or maybe it's not, again, talk about leaders, it's not just a matter of titles. If you're in healthcare, you're a leader because you're taking care of patients. So if you're having the difficult conversation with the patient who's not happy, and you're not letting them do that, you're not letting the employee have that conversation, how are they getting better at it? Right? So this is one huge thing. This is why learning, not just to delegate, but why delegation is actually important, crucial. And then when we talk about those conversations that need to be had, not just with employees, but what about those conversations about accountability with the actual employees themselves? So it's one thing, okay, I can talk to a patient, they're unhappy, or I could talk to the patient who's maybe being a distraction to the team or being a little unruly. But then how do you have accountability conversations with the people that you're actually leading without also sounding like a jerk? That's the thing, right? Anyone can sit down and just say, hey, Bob, you're really stinking up the joint, or, Bob, your outcomes are horrible. And I can remember numerous occasions that I would give accountability conversations, and it was just me basically telling employees how poorly they were doing. And I really foolishly couldn't understand at that point why they get upset with the feedback. So honestly, eventually what I stopped doing was having those conversations because it wasn't leading to anything positive. Number one, they weren't getting any better. And number two, it was just actually creating more disconnect between me and the rest of the team. So at some point, I just stopped having the conversations. And that's why a lot of people avoid it anyway, is that they view every accountability conversation as conflict, so to speak. It's, I don't like conflict. So let me just, and it's really comes down to that, yes, it can create conflict if you don't have the conversation in the right way. I really appreciate what Gary Vee talks about, which is you can be kind while giving feedback that still creates change and helps the person understand that they're not necessarily where they need to be to perform well at the job. So if you don't have the skills necessary to actually just sit down and ask questions and figure out, all right, why is this person struggling? Maybe I didn't train them the right way, or maybe I didn't teach them that great when I onboarded them, and this is why they're struggling. So instead of me blaming them, hey, your cancellation rate really sucks. What's going on here? Versus, hey, I see your cancellation rate, it's a little higher than everybody else. What do you think you're struggling? Or what do you think the rationale is? Right? And I distinctly remember one conversation I had with a physical therapist back in the day. And we had the conversation, that's actually what it was about. This is patient cancellation rate and retention rate were pretty bad. And we were talking, we went over some solutions, and at the end of the conversation, he just straight up looked at me and said, this is not how I thought it was gonna go. Because what he was anticipating was old younger Dan, which would be the attacking version of me, instead of the person who's trying to understand and then create some solutions for the problems that he was having. So this is what I'm talking about. So they avoid those kind of conversations. I already talked about the fact that our identity, when you're a high performer, is tied to being the best, right? You think about doctors or, honestly, anybody who's getting a high level degree. You're in high school or maybe, and even within college, you are the best of the best cream of the crop. And then you get to graduate school or medical school, and all of a sudden, everybody else is just like you. And you don't feel so special anymore. You're maybe in a class of 50 people, and they're all the best of the best. Now you're thinking, who the hell am I? But that's what happens a lot of times with those leaders, right? They're trying to prove themselves, be significant. It's definitely a little bit more of a male issue because we just have that mentality where I need to prove myself, just embedded in our DNA. And that's okay to be like that. But at some point, you need to start shifting. And that's the thing. Is you say, okay, it's okay like that if you're young. You're a young clinician trying to prove yourself and you're doing it by getting better at your skills. All right, no worries. But at some point, the shift needs to happen where you go, I have to stop focusing on myself and I have to start understanding how to focus on the rest of the team. So the identity of being the best needs to shift. And then I spoke about that lack of emotional intelligence. Now, there's numerous things that go into that. But when we talk about communication skills, and that goes both ways. How do I communicate to other people? But then how do I receive communication? So when I was younger, and I have a very direct, A, it's my personality, and B, it's the fact that I'm from North New Jersey. Very direct is the way I would normally communicate. And that's always the way I like people to communicate to me. Time wasting for me is a big no-no. But I would talk to everybody the way I liked to be spoken to. And then one day, a clinician older than me pulled me aside and basically said, you're trying to have all of us, you're talking to us like you like to be spoken to. You have to learn how to actually speak to all of us one-on-one. And I'll be honest, the first thing that popped in my head wasn't, you know what, she's totally right. It was, what the fuck is she talking about? There's 15 of you. There's one of me. Wouldn't it make more sense for 15 employees to learn how to communicate to one director? Now, obviously, said that in my head, but that's definitely what I thought. And she was totally right. Because at the end of the day, you're not trying to figure out how to speak to 15 different people. There are only a few different kind of communication patterns that we all have. So you're really learning about 4 to 5 different ways to speak to people. So it's not as hard as you really think. But when we don't then factor in, all right, how do I actually like to receive information? It's very easy to say, hey, I'm great at giving feedback. How well are you at receiving feedback? Do you allow employees to, challenge you or tell you where you're maybe failing or not doing your job to the level? Will you receive it without attacking them? And then when we look at how well are you at empathy? And I know you can go to Twitter and there's some chit chat about, empathy is a weakness. Empathy is a strength, especially in healthcare. That's one of the biggest skills that patients look for. And it's one of the skills that we also struggle in healthcare, especially medical doctors. They're bad, and I'm bad at it. So it's not even a knock. I'm naturally horrible at empathy. Now, I've worked on it tremendously, but when I was younger, I was really bad at it. How well can you connect with other people? How can you take the time to understand them and build rapport with them if you're not empathetic at all? Now, there are plenty of other skills, decision-making, time management, but you have to understand, do I have those skills? So when we're looking at skills necessary to be a clinician, do we then look at the skills, all right, what do they need to actually be good at as the person who is technically in charge or running a department? So that's what we got to start with. What skills do we need to actually communicate with employees? And when we're really asking a question, how do I get the best out of my employees? It's not just benefits. It's not flexible scheduling, growth plans. Those things are all important. It's the day-to-day stuff. How well do I communicate to them? And if you're noticing, hey, they're not as motivated, or I just can't seem to get more out of them. I think one of the frustrations I've heard from owners is they just, especially the younger employees, they just want to come in. If they're a 9 to 5 employee, they want to work 9 to 5. They don't want to do anything extra. Maybe even if they're a doctor and they're making, a good amount of money, they don't want to do anything at night. Maybe if it's an event or community event on the weekend, it's like pulling teeth for them. How can you get them to do those things if you don't know how to communicate the importance of them? So just, factor that in. And when we're looking at the after promotion to determine, all right, how do I know if I promoted the right person? You have to also understand, what are you looking for that person to actually do, right? So is it just, well, I promoted them so we could, make more money? Well, that's a shit outcome. What are you legitimately putting them in charge? Like, what are you putting them in charge for? What is your actual goal? And that's where a lot of owners are actually struggle. They don't really understand. A lot of times it's just, well, I'm going to promote the person because I don't want to lose them. Or you give somebody maybe some bullshit promotion to make them feel better. It's like, well, I'll just make them, the manager of folding towels or, something like that. It's like, it's made up and fake. So if you don't have a strong reason for actually promoting somebody, that's your first mistake, number one. Because then if you don't know what the goal is, how are you going to know if they're actually doing a good job or not? And how are you measuring them outside of just revenue? Because there's a lot of you out there who are saying, well, the revenue, that's not my biggest thing that I'm tracking. Okay, cool. So what do you want to see from the people that you're promoting to determine they're doing a great job or they're not doing a great job? Why am I promoting this person? What is the legitimate reason here? And then once you identify that, now you know, all right, what do I actually need to see from them? Because results can also trick bad performance. And I've seen it. The person who's running a whole clinic, and I'm going to use the word, and I don't like using it only because it gets overused, but insanely toxic individual. Only cared about himself. And the clinic numbers were phenomenal. A lot of visits, cancellation rate was low, a lot of referrals. So on the surface, everything looked great. And that's how we tricked the owner into thinking he was a really good director. But under the surface, what were we saying that everybody else knew? This guy's shit. Everything had to run through him. And what I mean by that, I'll give you a perfect example. Director connects with the doctor because he was amazing at networking. Go out, meet a doctor. Hey, we create a new relationship. Super valuable. But then, all right, now if any of you guys want to send a patient to this doctor, just let me know and I'll email or text the doctor. Gatekeeping is, I think, what some of you call that, right? So everything runs through me so I can show my importance versus, hey, team, here's, Dr. Smith's information, or here's Dr. Smith's point person if you want to make an appointment versus, just let me know and I'll connect. One of the biggest reasons that I knew at some point that I was actually being crap as a leader was I wasn't seeing growth from employees. Wasn't seeing anybody really stepping up, really get better at their leadership skills. Yeah, the technical skills of being a clinician, those got better. But their ability to have those conversations with patients, have a conversation with the non-compliant patient, or the patient who's showing up late all the time, or the patient who's trying to, shorten their treatments. You know what I'm talking about? The kind of patient who's just, hey, I got about 20 minutes, so maybe we could just work on me and give me some heat and stim, and then, magically they sometimes find more time. How to have those kind of conversations. But when we look at their overall growth, for me, it was just a red alert went off when I just looked around one day and I was just thinking, dude, these people should be better. And it's not them. It's definitely me. At some point, if I'm spending this much time, and even if I was being in my, if I really thought I was doing a great job, because there are people in leadership positions who are not bad people. Again, we're not talking about people who are toxic, all about themselves. I know I've mentioned that a little bit, but this is also for people who just, hey, I don't have those kind of, mentality. I just don't know what the hell I'm doing. Are other people getting better too? And again, do you want more leaders? Yes. So you're seeing that. And then, another good one too is just escalating past the manager. So what I mean by that is you created this person, put this person in a position of management. Your expectation should be that, hey, I want the employees to go to you. Right? That's one of the reasons why I created the role or had the role available and I promoted you to is that the employees can go to you. So the question is, why are they still coming to me as the owner? Right? So they keep skipping the manager. And I know a lot of you out there, because I've spoken to a lot of managers, they're just kind of scratching their head saying, what's going on here? And they either A, don't trust you, so you never built any rapport with them. Another great reason is you say you're going to do things and then nothing ever changes. That's a huge one. Hey, we'll sit down and have the meeting tomorrow. You know what? Something came up. I can't do it. I have to move it to next week. Okay. And then next week comes, oh, you know what? I have a walk-in evaluation, a walk-in new patient. I got to take that. Or I'm going to follow up with the doctor and find out. Did you do it? No. So, number one, you never build any trust with them. And number two, you just don't do what you say you're going to do. Right? And then the other aspect is that one of the biggest indicators of great leadership is, what does your turnover look like? What is your employee retention? Are people quitting? So if more people are quitting, and it's so easy just to blame the employees. Right? It's so easy just to say they're not as committed. And it can't be the manager's fault because he or she is working a lot of hours. I'm in the clinic with them. I see them busting their butt. It can't be them. So very easy. It's just employees. They don't understand our mission. Do you sit down with any of them and ask them, what is the actual reason you're quitting here? So if you're starting to see an uptick, the employees haven't changed. It's the person who's leading the employees. So that's a big red flag as well. And then we talked about accountability. It's not just the conversations, but it's the fact of who do they keep accountable? Meaning, is it 100%? I always kind of look at it as the action potential, all or none. It's either everybody stays accountable, including managers, directors, and owners, or nobody. So do they have favorites maybe? Well, this is my buddy. We go out drinking on Fridays after work. So I'll give him a pass. And then I got this employee who I don't really like. And I'm going to really chew their ass out. Or I'm going to hold them accountable. And here's the secret that a lot of you don't understand is that employees see that. They see who's being held accountable, and they see that it's not consistent, right? So this is even important too if you need to hold the managers accountable. So those are some of the biggest things that you should be on the lookout to determine, did I promote the right person? Now, how do we actually determine, all right, if I now understand that I need to start training people and developing their skills, and we've outlined what to look out for after you've promoted somebody to tell you whether or not they're doing a good job, what could you actually do because obviously the next question too is, all right, Dan, that's great. How do we actually what can we do to avoid all that if possible? Well, great question. So what we're going to do here, the biggest thing is that put them in some kind of position that's going to be more or less a carbon copy of something they need to do as a manager. And that was one of the best things I ever did. Because I see people who have great talent, same as you guys, working hard, getting great outcomes, talking to patients, and then, all right, they'll be a great manager, and then they were terrible. So at some point I said, I got to start being able to see, do they have the skills necessary? So, because again, it's one thing to understand what skills do you want your leaders to have? But then it's another thing to figure out, does this person have them? Because again, different roles bring out different skills. So one of the things I would definitely say is what maybe situations in your own organization can you have that person do for you? You give them some responsibility. Maybe it's, leading a team meeting. Doesn't mean it's every meeting, but maybe you got a team meeting. Hey, George, I'm going to have you on this one. Let's talk about what we're going to discuss or what we're going to train the team on. Or maybe it's having them train new employees, right? So if you ideally have an onboarding process, who does the training there? Is it always the director or manager? So what if you had another employee who you were thinking, because again, you say, I want to know how well they communicate. I want to know how well they essentially coach. All right, so give them that opportunity. Get some feedback from the person they're training. Get some feedback from them. How's it going? Or maybe you can put them in charge of an important KPI in your office. Maybe it's, hey, our cancellation rate is not so great. What do you think about spearheading, sort of a campaign to reduce that? Or, no cancel, no call, no shows, plan of care completion. Hey, I noticed about, this is an issue in chiropractic care and physical therapy, especially, but patients don't complete their treatments. What could we do to bump our number up? So maybe you give them something like that and you see how well they do with it. How well do they communicate with the team? Do they, come up with something innovative, right? Because we're doing everything ourselves as the leaders, and then we're not giving employees the space to be creative or be curious. And you'd be surprised how many times they have phenomenal ideas that we just never hear. So can they come up with something? Can they lead a project? Maybe, obviously at some point, every organization doesn't have an onboarding process, right? You got to start from scratch. Or maybe it's a workflow improvement. That was something that some individuals that I had working at the front desk, hey, I think we can do this differently. The way we're maybe collecting data or just our workflow on this kind of system is a little clunky. I think there's a way to improve it. So give them maybe a project like that. And ultimately, what you're looking for essentially is, what are their communication skills like? Do they take any initiative? What's their, their follow-up, right? That's one where it's just, I sent an email and I didn't hear back from the person, so it's up to them versus, all right, did you actually follow up with them? Well, no, I didn't do that. And again, talked about some of the skills at the beginning. How well do they accept feedback? Their accountability. If you put them in charge of a project or a training and it didn't go well, were they accountable for it, right? Or did they maybe say something, the employee wasn't that great, or, they really weren't listening. Do they want to blame everybody else versus, what? It was me. I really didn't know what I was doing, or, I tried this different approach, and I tried this different approach, and nothing really stuck. But ultimately, it's on me. So, that's what you're looking for. And really the biggest thing that we need to do outside of having people, putting people in positions where they can actually do the role is, again, having a clearly defined standards, or I kind of got away from using the word expectations a bit, but what are the expectations for them in the role, right? So how often do we just put somebody in a position and then we don't actually even tell them, hey, this is what I'd like, this is what I need to see from you in this role, or this is how you're going to be measured. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about understanding, what's the outcome we're looking for here with this new employee? Like, why am I actually promoting them? But then how am I measuring their success? Well, it's very, very important for you to know that as the owner. But does your manager or leader know that, right? So different. If people don't understand how their success is being measured, how can they do the job? And I'll give you guys a really good example. It's not so much a leadership one, but I think this one will really ram it home. There was an occupational therapist I worked with a few years back, and I had moved from New Jersey to Vegas, and I was helping this organization out remotely. And I was talking to an occupational therapist, and she tells me, so and so, it's kind of busting my chops, so to speak, about the amount of patients I was seeing. And then the person in charge was just, all right, well, I kind of want you to be seeing this many patients, but you're seeing this many. And she goes, but nobody ever told me that was how many patients you wanted me to be treating. And she goes, I would have totally been fine seeing that many patients, but nobody ever said anything. So how was I supposed to know? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So here they are, basically, looking at her saying you're not doing your job to the fullest. So they're definitely not looking at her favorably. And it's all because they never communicated, here's what we actually want to see from you in the role. I want you to see this many patients, or I want to see this much growth, from the employees. And again, I have no problem if you say, hey, well, I just want to have a revenue goal. Revenue goal is important. You're not growing your practice. How are you staying open? But that's just part of it, right? Hey, Dan, you're the new director. I'm going to really be looking at our cancellation rate. I'm going to be looking at our provider utilization rate. Maybe you said, maybe this is one's for you. I want to see, what the team is actually billing out per treatment, or doing with the patients per treatment, at least, to see, are we maximizing their sessions? And I mean that in a good way. If they don't know that, and they're walking around, maybe they are being great. Right? They're saying, look, I'm communicating to the employees at a very high level. I'm actually holding them accountable. They can still fall short when it comes to metrics. So if they don't know these things, that's on you. And really what I want you guys to start figuring out, number one, is, and I will say this on blue in the face, number one, that leadership within your company, if you're somebody at the tippy top, CEO, executive, owner, starts with you. You really are setting the standard. So I know everything we talked about was managers and employees, but you got to start with yourself first, man. So assess your own skills and be honest about it. Are you helping other people grow? Do other people trust you? Do you even trust employees? Do people get better when you have accountability conversations with them? Or do you end up repeating the same thing or seeing the same thing and then deciding not to say anything? So start with yourself first, please. Number two is start understanding everything we just spoke about. Looking at employees, testing them out if you think they have leadership skills, putting them in positions where they can actually run a project, just like we spoke about. You got to see them demonstrate the behaviors. And then if you don't have any kind of training, or if you're one of those people who say, oh, we don't have the time. You don't have the time? Look, leadership, for my money, will always be the most important skill. And I know somebody can say, bro, there's plenty of crap leaders who do amazing in business, do amazing in healthcare. They grow organizations, they grow practices. They're running monster-sized organizations. Yeah, 100%. Doesn't mean they're, but the question I would always flip back to you, though, is even in that instance, how much is being left on the table? How much are patients being affected? Those are the things that you don't always see. And enough for some people out there, that's not actually a concern. I totally get it. There are definitely people who are just, hey, look, if we're making a good amount of money and we're getting pretty good outcomes, that's a win. But for a lot of you out there, you say, no, I want to run a great business, but I also want to get patients better. I want to take care of my employees. So if you're not seeing those metrics that matter for patient care and employee care, and then you say, well, we don't have time for leadership training. Are you shitting me? Right? So you have to create the pipeline. You got to create the training. And I already said at the beginning, if you guys, honestly, after listening to all this, and you're just saying, I don't know how to identify people, I don't know where to start, or you know what, I would love to create some leadership training for my team. Maybe I don't see where I have the time, or I just don't know how to structure it and build it out. Honestly, guys, just book a call. I know, we talked about this on previous episodes. Book a call, make your life a lot easier, man. Just let somebody help you out. Again, we're talking about leadership. One of the biggest things we do is try to figure out everything ourselves, and we just struggle. There's nothing noble about struggling all alone for weeks, months, or years. And I know a lot of us think that. The most noble thing you could do is get help in the areas that you're not so great at, especially as it relates to those skills that maybe you're lacking in, having a huge positive effect on other people. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up. I want you to keep an eye on when this episode comes out. In the show notes, I'm going to have some, giveaways for you, make things a little bit easier for you to at least start identifying, all right, how well are we doing with our leadership development? Where can we get better? Appreciate your time as always. Catch you on the next episode.